Let's do it.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining today. It's really like a great pleasure. We are here today with Matt Whitby, and we are gonna talk about the use of VR as a tool for prototyping. So before we start and we dive into with a little introduction for Matt, there is one thing I would like to be clear about is ask questions. So we are here. If you run this as a webinar, not as a recorded thing, is because we would like really you guys to pitch in with questions or with your impression. So I will make sure to have here your messages so nothing gets lost. So don't hesitate to ask anything. So first of all, maybe we can start with a high-level introduction. Matt, thanks for coming. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So currently I am in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'm actually finishing up my degree within industrial design. But as you will see, I have ventured off quite far from industrial design into the whole virtual realm now. But yeah, I've been kind of playing and experimenting in the VR space for about 3 to 4 years now, and it started with Gravity Sketch, but now it's gone all over the place, and it kind of went everywhere. So yeah, I've gotten the opportunity to work on a lot of exciting projects, and going from garage door openers to concept vehicles to medical devices and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, and throughout the way, always sprinkling in VR when I can in any of those projects.
So and then what moved you basically? What is that got you in the first place excited about VR and to experiment with Gravity Sketch in this case as a tool?
Yeah, and that actually is kind of interesting because originally I was more interested in sort of the maker community, the maker spaces in my local area when I lived in Texas. And so I was always into building stuff. I always loved like electronics and things. But it's really challenging and it takes money and it's a lot of effort and time to build things. And so once I started to discover VR, it kind of opened this door of possibilities of being able to create and simulate things that in the real world I'll never be able to make. So it really let my imagination just go wild. So that was when I first, Gravity Sketch wasn't the first software. I think I actually used Tilt Brush to begin with. But I just remember I was like in a Microsoft store one time and I was sitting there and I was like, I can draw things in 3D. And I was like sketching like a little cylinder and blocks and stuff. And they had to kick me out before I could finish anything, but
you couldn't export. You not have a picture about your first creation in VR. That would have cool to show on your maybe profile.
Yeah.
So I think that basically, so this ability to create for the first time something that is just imaginable, just in your head, right? You are in VR, and this brings also kind of like to the first question that I had is that when do you think that VR adds value as a tool for, let's take it for a more general term, design?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a tricky question, and tricky for mainly the reason that it really depends on what you're working on. And I found over the years when I've been working on all kinds of different projects, I've had to balance this sort of excitement and passion and enthusiasm for VR with, how the practical side of actually using it. And what I've found is that it really helps when either the way that you traditionally visualize a process or a system either takes so long or is so difficult or hours or days or weeks that to do it in VR means I could get it done in a couple hours versus a whole week of time. And those I've actually found being the most impactful. And that's where like Gravity Sketch and Tavori have allowed me to, design things that I never thought I could in a time frame that I never thought I could either.
Okay, could you make, for the people just that are listening to us, right? Can you make an example of one? I have hundreds and I brought it to 2. When was that was actually true or possible or real for you? And also maybe when was the time that didn't work at all, right? Because I suppose maybe there were times in which you wanted to do it, but then now this is really not working. So when is that work very well, and when was that using VR as a design tool didn't?
Yeah, so there's a couple. I can really quickly think of what didn't work, and usually it comes down to when I'm more about exploring the novelty rather than actually the design. And there's an example of a project I was working on at Chamberlain Group for a garage door opener. I was like, well, we can simulate this in VR. And I was like, you can actually press the buttons and open the garage. But and then it was kind of just like, well, no one is questioning how you open a garage. You open it with a button. And so in that case, I was more excited about being able to actually press a button and open something in VR than it actually helped in designing that process. But what I found is kind of specifically within the automotive realm, that has been incredibly impactful for my design process and even being able to explore it. I never imagined I would ever even be in that space. I never imagined I would ever be able to design anything as a vehicle. And so, all the years that it took for traditional vehicle designers to have to get really good at understanding proportions and sketching ellipses and doing all these things. I was able to do that from day one with using Gravity Sketch. And so that was really impactful for me of being able to design systems and products. I worked on a video game where I was able to do a concept for an entire level. And I've never done concept art before, but this helped me to to get what was in my mind in 3D in that instance. And especially when it comes down to things that are moving, I found that and that's where I really have enjoyed using Tavori, in that when I have some examples, and I think you showed them on LinkedIn with some of the AR examples that I've done. We will see them probably later. But in those instances, I genuinely did not know how to visualize these things without using VR. And I didn't understand. I could do maybe 30 different still images of a storyboard, but it really helps just to have one streamlined animation of it. And previously, if I used Keyshot or some other rendering softwares, it would have taken hours and hours for that thing to even be, one, created and then two, rendered. But in this case, using real-time rendering, I was able to do it. I think I did those in one day. I did all 5 different iterations with animations and body movements and things just in one day.
Maybe I think for the people, we can show some of those right now. One question I had, so in a way, when it works, it depends, and it depends on the use, right? In this case,
definitely.
VR, when you use Gravity Sketch, it's amazing because you can see the product there, right? In that case, you have an impression of scales from the very beginning when you start, and that also allows you to design differently. For instead, it's kind of it's more utility kind of case in that sense, because you are able to communicate with a video much better than with a static storyboard, in a sense, right? So I think that then it really depends. I do have a question, maybe while I pick up the video for the people. All the people that are now joining, I see there are around 30 listening. Who has a Quest? Who guys of you has a Quest already and have experimented, for example, with tools like Gravity Sketch or Tilt Brush for your own design? And sometimes it's could be an art project, right? Maybe you have to Tilt Brush, even concept art with Gravity Sketch. So I'm just curious, who of you guys got a Quest? And meanwhile, maybe we can pick the video, and it should be going. So this was the video. Now, Matt, you don't see it, I suppose. Let me show my screen. Here we go. So you now see it, right? No.
Yes.
Wait.
Here we go.
Okay. Let's try again. Present now. Window. Share. Okay. So now you see it, right?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, this was one of the concepts for an AR app that you have built, correct? For a VR concept.
Yes, this was one of the sort of 5 different concepts that we were working on. So this was a team project last semester. And the original intent was to develop just a robotic platform that was for the medical space to be able to deal with sort of sanitation and cleaning. But then we kind of injected the usage of AR to explore a lot of really kind of futuristic concepts around data collection and sort of space mapping, and also like real-time feedback for cleaning. And so this concept right here was sort of illustrating sort of the idea of like gamifying the process of cleaning through the usage of AR. So you could actually be able to like paint on where you're cleaning, and then you also get like a real-time visualization of like where you clean more and where you clean less, and get a better understanding of how to better clean that item that you're dealing with. So
and that's interesting, because as you see, when you start making it, then you start adding details that maybe you wouldn't then think about. Like, for example, okay, where am I going to put a legend about where actually the indicating what's the cleaning status of an object? Maybe I've seen also the top left, you have that task accomplished with a check mark indicating, okay, now you have finished. So those are also, I think, all design choices that you kind of like look at and then consider when you are there, and you say, okay, if I'm here, what's gonna happen? So there's also, in a sense, also I feel maybe a different way of looking at things. Would you agree or not? Just curious.
Yeah, definitely. And you bring up an interesting point. That's what I think for me, VR has really helped it's how it's helped my design process, in that when I end up getting in the actual environment, or I'm dealing with the spatial environment of the hospital room or any of the different designs, like it forces me to think about aspects of this system, aspects of this product that I would have never had to think about before, or I could just kind of gloss over. And so it's actually been really helpful in that way too, of understanding like the either user journey or the experience journey of a product and system from a more holistic standpoint, rather than having to just kind of come up with this on the fly and representing it through a little bit more ambiguous images or things. Like, I actually have to understand it at a more grounded level in this space. So I definitely agree with that.
And this was instead another example, right, where you have like basically like this was for pure communication purposes, right? So showing what are the activities that someone that enters in a room has to do, and then showing basically which one were the one that posing most strain, correct?
So in this instance, it actually was, this idea was a way of visualizing how well the room was cleaned and where it was cleaned, actually. So, so these would have been like recorded movements of the staff to be able to kind of understand, okay, so here's where they cleaned, and then here's where the cleaning didn't work so well, right? They didn't clean it enough, so we have to go back in. And this was kind of the tie in the robot, so that way you knew, okay, since the person didn't really clean this sink very well, then the robot would come in and focus more on this area rather than the rest. So that was sort of what this concept was illustrating.
Okay. And so in this case also you basically like get this mannequin, and basically you add a different material. In this case was an additive material, I believe, and then tagged one with red to communicate that message.
Yes. So these were mannequins I actually downloaded for free from Mixamo.
Yeah.
And then fortunately they had a nurse with PPE and everything. And that was sort of one of the things I was a little bit worried about in trying to do this, was finding an actually appropriate like mannequin for this scene. But they had a perfect one there. And then I just kind of created a little rag in Blender, and then added it in so that we could get sort of a visualization of them actually cleaning with that.
Oh, right. So the rag was made in Blender, and then you got still the rigged model plus the rag, and then you put it into Tutori that basically has also rigged models compatibility, and then you animated it there.
Yes.
Clear.
And the whole scene too, that was all modeled in Blender, and the hospital room and everything. And then I took some of the UI elements from the palettes in Tavori to kind of just like throw some down to get some higher quality visuals in there as well.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So I've got here, some people say I have a Quest 2, someone experimented with Quest with Tilt Brush. I have a Quest, Ulysses says I have a Quest but haven't experimented yet. That's it's never too late. It's never too late. Ernesto used Quest 1 and 2 for Gravity Sketch with design work. So yeah, there are some Quest user indeed. So question was now, so you mentioned that there is clearly, based on your experience at least, right, a role for VR in design. So can you tell us a little bit about your process? right? When is the moment that this VR and this creation of space or animated scenes add the most value to you, and which way you have positioned it uh, throughout your design journey, maybe project based? How is it?
Yeah, so it there's a couple different ways that it's kind of incorporated into my process, and sort of the first thing is it's allowed me to kind of experiment and play really, because it's really difficult in the breadth of projects that I've worked on. There's all kinds of different ways of approaching these problems, and what VR has allowed me to do is kind of experiment and play with the processes and the sort of flow of these systems in a way without having to like put pen to paper or put money down on building like a full buck or full experience. So that in that aspect, it's been really fun just to kind of experiment to see what could I actually kind of visualize, what could I produce using VR, and then in the other side of it too, I think one of the things that I've noticed over the years is it's usually filled the gaps of skills that I don't have, right? Whether that be in rigging and creating characters and then positioning them and animating them. And that's actually like one of the things I've been using Tavori for a lot now is just bringing in rigged models, positioning them, and then exporting out to a rendering software and then rendering them in a scene. And because I kind of just get, and maybe it's a little bit of laziness and whatever, but I get kind of frustrated. I bring it into Blender and it's really complicated, and so I'm like, I just bring it into VR and I want to just move the bones without having to rotate it and figure out what angle I need to move it towards.
Yeah. And
So yeah,
if I can do one thing here, and that's fascinating
Yeah.
because I think that usually there is always this perception VR is complicated, VR is difficult, and I agree actually with everybody. The fact is that there is a place and a moment for VR used as a tool and for the final product. Because what happened very often, people think about VR as this shiny render that is at the end, that is maybe interactive, that where you can push button, where you maybe can see high quality material and texture and lighting and shadows. And yes, that is very complicated. Now that doesn't mean that is a different thing than saying VR is instead as a tool, and I can use VR actually as a design tool, right? That is a completely different thing that needs to be, I think, needs to be clearly understood. And if there is one thing that I want to encourage you to get out of this, is that it's not the same thing. So if you use a VR tool, VR it's more intuitive to use, because you can start drawing, you can start sketching, you can start doing something in Tilt Brush, for example, so much more easier, right? And I'm using Tilt Brush because it's one of the tools that maybe people are more familiar with. But similarly, with Gravity Sketch, you can just dare and move stuff around and stretch surfaces, right? And create 3D model. I mean, me as well, I was able to create a model of a car. Okay, I'm not gonna show it to you, maybe in some of my posts this week, but I did, and it's insane. I mean, like, I've never created any 3D model in my life. In the most complicated thing that I can do in Blender is remove the starting block at the beginning. That's for me, basically, that's it. And instead, with tools like Gravity Sketch and tools like Tvori, for example, and I hope many more are going to come in the future, you are actually able to do stuff that you will never be able to do with 2D software in the same amount of learning time. I'm not talking about learning time. So that's really, indeed, animating and moving a block is just moving a block, and that's it, right? So it's not that complicated. Waving with a puppet is just, okay, you do like this, you wave, and the animation is there. So this unlocks so many other opportunities, especially for creatives, especially in the early design process when the visual fidelity is not that high. And I want to stress this because there is always this misconception, right? I don't want to take the stage in any way, Matt. I'll give you the words back to you. But it's just because I think it's so important and people do not grasp it yet. So, exactly. And Ulysses says, not every project has to be Half-Life Alyx. Yes, exactly. And, maybe sometimes being sketchy and being low poly helps people to focus on the functionalities other than the look. So you get completely different feedback regarding maybe something that is in space when it's super shiny, maybe, and there are textures and there is lighting, when it's something that is low poly. Just the feedback that the user gives you it's just completely different. I have Janaline Pepel who asked, did I hear Matt say he's exporting for AR also? I don't know if you've ever worked on AR or if you've ever used any of your DVR tools to export to AR.
Yes, actually. So I've done, and this is where sort of gaming engines kind of come into play with this, but I've done little AR experiences where you can like have a little animation pop up, and I actually created one. So I used to work for a nonprofit here in town in Cincinnati, and we were looking at doing sort of a exploratory garden experience with a little AR phone, and you could like explore the different plants and things. And so I used Gravity Sketch to go in and like model up a little playful low poly flower, and then use Tavori to animate the flower coming up and like a little bee flying around it and stuff. And yeah, so that was a lot of fun, and then brought it into Unity and kind of created the AR side of it from that perspective. But yeah, I definitely, and it's something I'd like to experiment a little bit more with as I go along. But and especially earlier when I was working on VR projects too, a lot of the VR tools kind of supplemented whatever I didn't know in terms of like Blender or anything like that. So I was actually looking back through some old projects recently, and I used to use like Gravity Sketch and Tavori to model everything. I would model everything in there and then bring it into, different softwares to kind of render it. And it actually helped provide sort of a basis and an understanding of like how I actually model things and create things. So that way, when I did go to the other softwares and started learning them, it made it so much easier to understand because I kind of already had laid that groundwork and understanding with those tools, and I didn't have to like worry about, like you were talking about, grabbing and moving and just all of the shortcuts just to move something, right? You just grab it and move it,
Yes.
And you can
why do
I?
Yes.
Yeah. Doesn't get any better than that.
I've got another question from Ernesto. He asked, what is your workflow regarding file formats when importing and exporting for Tvori?
Yeah, so what I've been recently doing is basically bringing it into Blender and then breaking up the different pieces and things that I need to. And so I usually go from Blender and then export out and bring that into Tvori. Or if there's any like Gravity Sketch models that I want to bring in and animate, it really depends. A lot of times it's like where the origin point of the models are, to get kind of technical there. And it's usually playing around with like positioning the models. That way when I bring it in, it's not like, 100 feet the other direction. So Blender's kind of been that like go-to tool for me of kind of consolidating models, preparing them, and then bringing them in into Tvori specifically. But I do want to play around a little bit more with actually texturing and bringing it in. And that was something that I found was actually really exciting when I was bringing in the Mixamo rigs, was that the full textures were brought in. Yeah. And that was awesome. So I'm also want to kind of start playing around with using Substance Painter, Substance Designer to kind of build those textures in and bring this in too.
And by the way, interestingly, there is one thing that people don't know, because we have done a poor job at showing it, but it's coming. So for the people, you guys, now you can also get images and basically apply a certain image as a texture to an object in Tvori as well. So that also like adds to your freedom. In that sense, and I agree. Yes, so I've also been using Blender, so I had to learn a little bit more about what to export, and I realized that sometimes, I don't know if it happens to you in Gravity Sketch, that the normals are flipped. Yeah, that was like, oh my god, why now I cannot see the door of this car? I spent so much time. What have I done?
Yeah.
And it was like, anyway, it was not really my mistakes, about how Unity handles those kind of like surfaces and stuff. So that's good. I got another question. What would you suggest as a good starting project? Something that's not too hard and can work as proof of concept. Well, here I maybe need to ask a follow-up question for what specifically, right? Because that's one thing, right? When you are designing with VR, it could be, for example, there could be so much, right? It's a tool, right? So what can I start sculpting? Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe there are so many things that you can do with a hammer. What's the good starting project for a hammer? I mean, I don't know. It depends. Are you in construction? Are you in art? So that may be as a follow-up question. So I do have another question from Mohammed. Have you experienced inviting anyone to show your work in VR instead of recording a video?
Yes, actually, and so this was during the summer. I had the opportunity to do an internship at Ford, and this was sort of my first experience. I mean, the pandemic's going on, so we had to go virtual. So they were trying to experiment with that, and at the time, we actually had access to sort of the co-sketch abilities within Gravity Sketch, and this was a little bit before it was released. And so this was my first experience with that. And that's what really sold me on the capabilities of VR. Because I was able to, with these other designers around the country, we were able to actually work on an interior of a vehicle at the same time and be passing each other ideas and creating all these different concepts at the same time. And I've had experience in the past working on a team with product designers, and one of the challenges is kind of getting all of the aesthetic ideas into one object, right? And instead of it sort of being this more competitive thing where you both show your concepts and then choose one, how do you bring those ideas together? And that's where being able to actually do it collaboratively in VR really solved that, because in real time we were able to pull and move and change the mesh and change the designs together and get real-time feedback and all that. So it was so much fun. I just remember I spent, I think, a 2.5-hour stint with one of the other interns, and we were just in VR the whole time, creating things and sharing ideas.
There is now a lot of talk, of course, about using VR for collaboration. And, I'm a big fan of meeting other people in VR to kind of connect. My feeling is that very often you end up purposeless. So you go here and now, okay, what are we going to do now? Okay, we can talk, sure. It's more immersive, it may be different, but when you meet in VR with a purpose, when he says, okay, we have to create something, right? And that is a totally different level of really collaborating and you really leveraging the technology. So right now with Tuori, actually, the first step that we have taken, and this is maybe a public invite to everybody. So we are now allowed basically to have design reviews together with other people within VR. So basically it's hey Gabriele, I would like to join one of these design review. You should send me a message. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can send a message here. You can do whatever you want. You can say, I want to join once. And basically the way that works is that you have a scene, and then you can invite other people in, and you can review the animated prototype that you have created. So we are not at the stage where we allow co-creation, so that's clear, but you can still join from Quest, and we have a big surprise coming up towards in a week or two. So stay tuned, actually subscribe to the channel so that if there is something coming up, you'll get notified. But of course, if you have questions, ping me on LinkedIn. You're certainly gonna find me, Gabriele Romagnoli. Tuori. I mean, there are many Italians working at Tuori anyway, so. So, Matt, I have, let me see, I think we have kind of exhausted. Ulysses, if you come up with your follow-up, it's what's your project, what's your reminder, if it's your portfolio, to show something specific about product design or maybe user experience design, just let us know. You can answer back, and then I'll ping Matt again. So we have been talking, we have shown some example, but maybe do you have something that can show a little bit about your process, what you have done, and then basically some use cases or some project where VR was used as a design tool?
Yes, I actually have a whole folder full, but I'll go through a couple ones here. So I'll first, I mean, currently I'm working on a project around VR, but I'll go through some of the older work that I have just to kind of showcase some of examples of earlier in my design process and things. So let me go ahead and get that going here. So I will show you, this was when I first really started using Tvori as a design tool and sort of experimenting it with creating virtual or VR experiences. And let me share this real quick.
By the way,
There we go.
Mohammed,
Okay.
while Matt shares, yes, people need to have that installed. So there is a whole instruction. If you just get an email, you can just add you up and you'll be able to see it.
Okay, so this is an example of just showcasing an animation. So this was a project actually for a company here in town called Vector, and it's also, there's another kind of parent or sister company called VR Perspectives, and they work on sort of creating training experiences for unconscious bias in the workplace. And so this was actually designing a tutorial and sort of working through the UX of that tutorial and sort of how people would understand where to step. And so in this instance, this would be kind of representing somebody in VR, and this is the first thing that they're doing. So this would be like, when they walk in, they get into it and they get a little confirmation that they've stepped into that thing. So this was sort of some of the earlier work, and there is all kinds of a lot more of these. And I was able to kind of showcase again, just being able to show to the development team, okay, here's how this animation would actually function. Here's how, the feedback that they would get real time. And then, I have some more of these. This is the full kind of version of this. So this was actually going to be walking through sort of the upfront or sort of experience of this tutorial. And in this case too, it wasn't really about how high fidelity it was, or the level of quality with it. It was just communicating, this is the experience that the person is going to have when they step into this experience, and this is how they're going to teach, or this is how they're going to learn how to actually interact in the VR environment. And one of the challenges designing training experiences, you get a whole host of people in terms of their experience with VR, and most people haven't actually tried it or never have done it before. So teaching people how to kind of interact in the VR space is so important, and to do it really intuitively is so important, because otherwise they're kind of lost in the rest of the experience. So this was just kind of showcasing,
which button you have to press, and
and this was actually before, I think, material animation, and before you could actually hide things. So I had to come up with tricky ways of hiding things, and so now once the material switching and animating feature came in, I was like, this is amazing. It took care of a lot of the problems I was facing in this. But that was an example of one of these projects. And this was actually, so I'll show a little bit of what some of the earlier concepts too around. So this was another training device. This is actually Gravity Sketch. And so again, just kind of mocking out really quickly what the UI would look like in this space. In this case, you were supposed to place cones at a specific distance from a control panel, and so I wanted to try to demonstrate what the UI would look like for that. And same thing with different menu panels and things. So that was actually really interesting and helpful. And then now, so in some of the work that I've been doing now, I've been taking that to kind of the next level and trying to actually create a little bit more fleshed out visualizations. And so this was kind of a combination of a bunch of different tools. And some of it being Maya from my team, and then the other ones, so with the hands, we took the Oculus hands, and then I brought it into Vori, posed the hands, and then exported it back out and into Keyshot, and then did some rendered it, and then brought it into Photoshop, and then did some Photoshop work over top of it.
I do have a question here. So there is certainly the need at some point to show something that is more fleshed out, right? Or at least and this is my personal question, right? When is that the case? So when is that the case that we need to show something that is to some extent, could you say prettier? Would I say something wrong if I say prettier?
No, yeah. So in this case, this was going to be client facing. So it was important that it was as clear as possible. So that's sort of where if it's iterations for me, these earlier Gravity Sketch ones, right? I wouldn't necessarily show this to a client, or I wouldn't pitch this as the final proposal. But when I'm just trying to think through and get those ideas out, I don't want to have to bog myself down and trying to go through this whole process of rendering it and going through all that. So that's where I find, for me, when I'm just trying to hammer out concepts as quickly as I can, I don't really care about what it looks like in that instance. And then once I'm ready and want to kind of display or get some of the more finalized concepts, then I go through this whole process of like bringing it out into KeyShot, rendering it, making it look really dramatic, adding some more layers of fidelity. And I find it's sort of a balancing act of, and I think I have them up here. Show it. I'll find it later. With the AR, specifically with the AR videos you showed earlier, with those ones, it's kind of a balancing act between when is the level of fidelity going to be distracting where people can't really focus on what I've designed and all they see is like, oh, why doesn't it look good? Or when does it kind of just become, kind of extraneous and I'm just doing it for the sake of it looking nice, and that's sort of a balancing act I'm still trying to get to, because, and that's where honestly with the AR experience and kind of prototyping out those, I kind of set it up so that whatever I modeled, whatever I created could be used in a bunch of different areas. So like, for instance, I wasn't going to create that Blender model of the entire environment just to have it, like I wanted to have that so then I could go into Gravity Sketch and create animation or create iterations, or I could bring it into Vori and animate over it, right? And so that work was able to be used in multiple areas, and it raised the level of fidelity of that environment. So that's where I try to balance that a little bit. Is this going to benefit me in other iterations, or am I just doing this for this one to look amazing?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's tricky, and I do find myself, I have to kind of check myself because I'll want to kind of make it look, I'll try to make it look crazy and super realistic, and I'm like, why am I spending 5 hours on one? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, this is, I don't need to be spending this long on this.
I can imagine. Yeah.
But yeah, and these are even some earlier ones. I think this was like prototyping out a keyboard and literally just grabbing and placing and kind of playing around with the positioning and kind of ergonomics of this keyboard. And then
there is also another thing that is fascinating. Like, so sometimes people think that it's just VR as a tool, but actually, when you think about it, it's like just complementary to other things that you do, right? So I don't think that what happens very often is that people jump into this and they say, okay, but can I do the same thing that I do in Blender, for example, in Gravity Sketch? No, you don't, and you shouldn't. Right? Can I do the same thing? Can I do, for example, like onion skin or maybe advanced shadows in Tvori, or like, no, you don't, and maybe you shouldn't. It's a bit like it's having. I think that the key and the advantage is having that flexibility and being able to move from one tool to another when it's needed. And I think that being versatile and hopping between it's what makes it like most useful. So when you mention like, okay, I just don't know how to rig, or it would take me too long to position properly a hand, so I just put it in Tvori, get it in, position it, and bring it back. So, and I think that is when those and you leverage the most out of it, because you cannot expect that you can do everything from scratch from the beginning till the end.
Definitely. And I brought this up because this is sort of another example of utilizing Tvori to kind of make up for the skills that I don't have, and then using the tools that are, really good at, rendering or things to kind of take care of that. Because in this example, this was a part of sort of that robotic platform that we were developing and looking at the whole system and how it would work in an actual hospital space. And so in this instance, I took that same mannequin and just positioned it, rendered it out again within KeyShot, and I tried. I think at one point I was like, well, I'll try doing this in Blender, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't position it. It didn't. I imported it, and the thing was all blown up and weird, and the body was crazy. And so, and this is just another instance. It was just amazing to me. I was just able to create this so quickly, using Tvori to be able to position and pose these bodies. And so that was just, I totally agree. Being able to use VR for what it's good at, but not kind of overusing it to the point in which, now it's becoming more of a problem than it is kind of helpful. And it's always a balancing act for me in the fact that I'm like really passionate about this stuff and I really love, experimenting and playing, but it really is trying to find that niche where it works really well and then using it as much as I can in that space. And that's where like partnering it with different tools like Keyshot or even Unity and Unreal to an extent has been really, really impactful for my process and being able to explore concepts and things. And so, yeah, I totally agree with that. And I can show a little bit too. I mean, let me show. I wanted to show this. This was actually one that I did today, trying to do some for my website, actually trying to go back through and develop out some content for it. But I was inspired by, I think Mohammed's actually on this call. I was inspired by one of the renders he had posted on LinkedIn, and he had showed his controller interaction, picking apart. Yeah, and when I saw that, I was like, "That's perfect." And so I
show it again. Show it again. Explain us what we see.
Yeah. So, and this is actually an earlier project I worked on where it was a tool, a VR controller concept, where basically you could access different menus or different tools in the VR application by changing the position of your grip on the controller. Wow. So like if you wanted to like get into a sketching mode, you'd hold it like a pencil. If you wanted to get into a painting mode, you could like hold it like kind of like a paintbrush. And so the idea was, around the fact that controllers in the VR space right now are really defined by like a gun position, because it's, a lot of it is gaming.
You got a game.
Yeah. And so this was sort of looking at, okay, what if the controller was optimized for the purpose of sketching or for the purpose of creating in VR? And yeah, I in learning a lot of how to use Tvori and this, I went back through some of my projects and was like, this is a perfect example of how to use it and to be able to showcase this. Because originally I just had some renders of it in different hand positions, but being able to actually show it as you're moving to different hand positions and populating a different tool was really fun and exciting in this. But yeah, this is one of those projects where maybe aesthetically I'd like to go back through and kind of redo the actual product, but I still haven't seen any controllers that kind of play with that idea of being able to actually hold it in a different way. Because I really like this idea of like if you were doing minute editing details, you would be like more of a macro or a micro position, and then when you wanted to do big shapes, you would kind of like hold it in a different position and create.
No, look, this is really fascinating, and also why? Because it's fascinating to like, how else would you have communicated this and explained this? Because this is super clear. I mean, like this, I have no question. I know how it works. It's easy, right? It's easy. Now, of course, I mean, it takes effort to show this in a way that it's easily communicated. But in this way, I mean, it's just perfect. And the idea in itself, I think it's a great idea, actually. Someone should make it. Someone should really make it. We also have Matteo sending a heart, I hope, of appreciation, Matteo. But yeah. That's really nice. I have a question. So, okay, so I have a question. So, Mepi asked, what do you guys think about virtual production in Tvori? I asked to elaborate a little, and then she said, I mean, using Tvori to set up scenes for virtual production and use a tracked camera. I use live integration. It's amazing possibility with Tvori. So, like, how do you mix and match those tools with a stage in that case? Have you ever thought or experimented with it?
No, I haven't actually. Is that in reference to like being able to film yourself creating in Tvori, or is that for?
I think to set up a scene for virtual production. No, that's interesting because right now we do have is supported. Tvori does support mixed reality. So in that sense, if you have a green screen, you could still have the mixed reality environment right around you, but the actor still be in the scene on the green screen technically, right? So you could technically visualize that, and the scene could actually move around you while you are creating it.
Interesting.
Right, because now once you mixed reality
Yeah.
is supported, you could do that, especially if you have a camera with a tracker on top. Then you would be able to do that with Live. That's fascinating. Maybe I think we should talk because I'm curious to know how you see that happening. And this is one of the things that the moment that you put VR in people's hand, I believe that they're gonna come up with so many ideas and application, and that's what I love. It's like the Wild West. Yeah, so she confirmed, yeah, it's indeed for interacting and animating object in 4D plus the green screen. So yes, let me know what are your idea. Again, connect me and curious. Maybe there are opportunities that this could be something to play with. Absolutely. So, guys, we do have 15 more minutes left. I can go back to Matt and maybe ask him to show us something else if he has. Otherwise, please ask questions because I mean, maybe what people think about some question. I do have one more. So, what are you working on right now?
Yes. So currently, since this is my final semester at UC, I'm actually working on my capstone project, and it is very relevant in that it is around developing a system for prototyping out interaction within the VR space. And this is something in the the 3-4 years I've been working in this. Learning Unreal, learning Unity has been incredibly challenging, and I personally, because I've played around with coding and things in the past, that from that aspect it's been enjoyable, but it's been a lot of work. And so one of the things I started noticing in talking to people that are trying to get into this space, that are trying to sort of play in VR or even create projects that involve AR or VR, experiences, it's always the major stopgap of once they have to try to get into a gaming engine, they kind of lose it, or they can't showcase the full experience without actually building it, and so they don't end up doing it. So I wanted to kind of build a concept system where you could basically interact with 3D objects in a virtual space, and I believe you have the video of it too. If not, I can pull it up.
Yeah, pull it up because my screen are a bit messed up. So if you can pull it up.
Yeah,
and that's fascinating. That we have been thinking about this, and we at 4D, like, how do we create an intuitive system to enable people to basically like simulate interaction, right? And in 4D right now, you can just simulate. It's all basically like a big movie, right? Like you have seen with Matt, it's just a linear experience. But first of all, before Matt shows us, this is a topic that we're gonna stumble, we're gonna hit over and over again on this channel. So if you feel like here that this is something that might be interesting for you, and you wanna stay updated when we go live, when we do another interview, when we share some of our concept, when we are gonna prototype our own interactions, our own interaction system, and maybe scene creation here in 4D, and you wanna test it out, you should stay updated and you should really get in touch, because this is one of the things, and we had lengthy conversation with Matt, to be honest, about this. So this was like really like, how can we do it? How can this be possible? But why would you do it like this? Why would you do it like that? And that was really, really fascinating. And I mean, just for that purpose, I personally started studying interaction design just to understand the language, to be honest. Maybe a bit late at 35, but hey, it's never late, right?
Here we go. I can go ahead and show. So this is show you. Share my screen here. Okay. So this is a slide from the kind of slide deck that I have around this project. But this kind of showcases sort of the core of what the idea is here. And a lot of the inspiration for the system that I developed came from Adobe XD, Figma, and Sketch, right? The idea of creating these two-dimensional frames that then you define how it transitions. And the thing I always find really interesting is you're able to prototype an app by essentially having an interactive slideshow, and it's not really that complex, but you're able to do a lot with it. And there's, obviously some interesting elements around auto animate and being able to actually infer what somebody wants to do with motion. And so I wanted to take that idea of creating these individual frames or scenes and translate that into the 3D space, into a VR environment. So basically, you take this idea, you create these pieces of geometry, you capture a scene, and then you move the geometry however you want it to be moved, and then you capture another scene. So it's similar in that way to like keyframing, but instead of keyframing based off of specific values of different objects, you're doing it like on the whole scene itself. So that was sort of the idea. And then to animate or to interact with things, you basically define how that scene transitions to another scene. So you have, you know, in this case, I'm trying to find the least amount of transitions possible to get the most amount of work out of it. And so in this case, it's looking at, you know, using a switch kind of trigger, as I'm calling it, and then using a timer delay. So the timer delay between a scene would basically just animate it through, you know, with that given amount of time. If not, it would just blink to that other scene, right? Or if you put a switch in there, you can define a piece of geometry that you want to be the trigger, and then when you click on that, it moves to the specified scene, right? And then you could chain them along, so when it moves, and then it delays it, so it has a little bit of a delay when it animates, right? So that's sort of the core idea of this project, is kind of looking at these scene transitions and how you move between them. And I mean, now as I'm going through it and things, there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of complexity and difficulty, and a lot of where I'm kind of running into is I wanted to have this idea of one, having the ability to have non-linear animations, essentially non-linear
branching
storyline,
a branching storyline,
and kind of branch off into different scenes. So that in itself is kind of challenging. And then the other challenge is wanting it to have localized animations. So this is not on a scene level, it's on whatever specific piece of geometry that I'm doing. I just want to animate that, so that way I can copy it, move it, create more, and then create a super long line of iterations to be able to iterate and sort of sketch, if you will, in 3D space. So those are some of the challenges I'm trying to address now, and think through, and creating diagrams, and, you know, sketching in Gravity Sketch, and then soon I'm going to be doing some more Tori animations, and to try to work out how that will function. But yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things, and
it is incredible, you know, because there are so many choices that you have to make. So it's like, okay, what is important? Is a transition in terms of an animation from a state to another important? And if so, important enough to justify the time that you spend to animate it, for example, right? Because that depends very much on the project. I agree that for some project it might just be enough to have state 1, state 2, state 3, and the transition is just more like a big stop motion, right? Tack, tack, and that's it. And for some would be handy. But for some cases, like for example, when you want to communicate that UI, that for example when the guy was stepping in and the UI was moving, that it would be impossible almost with a step thing, because you need to show that thing in motion, how it reacts. So it is absolutely like we are really thinking so hard about it, and we are thinking about what about in something like this, right, where you have like storyboard, you have different scenes, and then you create some maybe fade in, fade out transition to move from one state to another. And again, right, we are still talking about early concepts, right? But you are able to go through the whole story and enabling designer to do this, because this is the key, right? I mean, the purpose of doing all this and studying is like, not that our developers do it because he's gonna tell you, yeah, but I can do it as fast in Unity. Yeah, that's good for you, but you're not a designer. So and you also are gonna design the training experience in a very different way in which a designer. And I believe, and I think everybody here believes, that in general VR needs more designer nowadays, because what we are seeing right now, it's rather unfriendly. Let's be polite, and let's say unfriendly for user. Let's say like that. Many, at least, of the B2B application. For games, I think that there are good experimentation. Right? It's better, even though smaller teams don't have that power and courage also to experiment with something new, because of course if something fails, so you stick with something that is kind of like known in a sense. So that's who knows, maybe a few months from now we can have you again, right, and show what came out of it, because honestly I think we will certainly keep talking about it, because I think it's really fascinating, and that we from our own are also experimenting and thinking about how this could work out. Guys, we do have a few more minutes, so please, if you have more questions, do not hesitate to ask. So the topic for today was about how can you use VR as a tool for prototyping, and it was nice. I felt that sometimes things kind of like diverge into something, but I felt we stayed pretty close to what was the promise, right? In a sense, tools, VR can be a tool to prototype, can be a tool to play, to experiment, to be fast and efficient, and there are certainly different tools for different purposes, right? And maybe there is got another one. I mean, I've just seen, I don't know if there is any architects or people that design spaces. I've just learned about another one. It's called Arkio, Arkio, and is mind blowing. It's another app that is also collaborative. It's on SideQuest. It is on SideQuest. So if you should go there and try it, because coming to Javier, what do you mean by mixed reality headsets? Mixed reality like Windows mixed reality headset or AR glasses? Yeah, yeah. I got a good question actually from Yingse Wang. It is a bit more challenging to do user testing compared with traditional user testing.
Yes, the short answer is yes.
Yes. Bye.
Yeah. It is definitely more challenging. That's something that I've been trying to figure out how to address. And one of the things, I mean, that's where being able to actually develop for Unity or for Unreal has been helpful. And you know, one of the things I'm going to be doing in this project for my capstone is be developing it in Unity and try coming up and creating sort of user testing experiences that I could ship out on Quest or SideQuest and have people try it out. And it's also, you know, due to the pandemic, it also makes it a little bit challenging in that respect of not being able to have people actually walk through it. But yeah, it's really challenging, but it's also, I think, really exciting because there's a lot of opportunities to be able to get a whole host of information that you just wouldn't be able to get otherwise. And I've actually worked on a project a couple of years back where I was developing, you know, this concept interaction with a drone, and you could fly around a city and things. And I was partnered with another student who developed the form, and I actually ran sort of a user test study, really crude user test study, where I had people try to fly through a series of goals, and I had 3 different control systems. And then I randomly assigned them the control system and was able to monitor how quickly they went through the goals, which ones they did and didn't go, and had it all export out to a spreadsheet.
Nice.
And then record the video and things too. So there are some really interesting ways, and that's another space I think there's so much possibility there. But it is challenging.
You know, and I think also that there is an interesting point, right? It's about user testing, and sometimes things are a bit mixed up. There is also user testing and user research. Sometimes the lines tend to be a bit blurry, right? So user testing sometimes is not just the testing on the final product, but it can also be I've made something very fast. Let me gather some quick feedbacks. I've seen people using VR and Tvori actually in some cases also to basically test fire exit, right? So you have a bunch of people, you put them in front of different signals that are animated or stuff is happening around them, and then they've gone through this basically like it technically almost an immersive experience through, but there is nothing interactive, right? So they just go in there and then they ask them questions like, okay, which one do you think it was clear enough, or on a scale from 1 to 5, how was clear, what you have changed, what you would have done in that situation, and all that. So then they put this to kind of like do user research, technically more than user testing. And in some cases VR is great because you can get some functional feedback, right? We went back to that what we discussed before. It's not about how things look but how things functions, and these allow, I think, a new world of gathering feedbacks and doing user research that right now you cannot do because you need to invite someone, right? But maybe you can just send a cardboard, give them a 360 video, and you're gonna be able to know much more, so much cheaper than flying them or maybe build something in the real world. So there's also the opportunity offered by quickly creating something in VR and exporting it and getting people through it. I think it's also very very fascinating. So thanks Yingse for the question, and I think it's it's a great closure. Also because these are some of the topics that we're going to discuss over and over again. The importance of linear prototypes against branching prototypes, and how to build storyboards, animated, static, how to create those concepts from designers in VR. So that's basically what we are going to try to talk here and go over more and more often. So Matt, I really want to thank you so much. We are certainly going to be in touch. You should get in touch with him if you have questions, and if you want to also get to know more about his portfolio, his experience, because I think that the versatility is key, and I think Matt is a very good example of that. Thank you very much, Matt.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Bye, Matt. Then have a good week and good luck for the rest.
You too.
Bye.